It was a quiet, gray morning in Pinebrook. Fog clung to the streets like a thick curtain, muffling the sounds of early traffic and birdsong. Inside the small-town police station, the scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. Sergeant Tom Davenport, 42, sat at his desk as he did every morning. Early, precise, unreadable. His broad shoulders carried the weight of grief he never spoke of, and his tired blue eyes rarely looked up unless he had to. Since losing his wife, Margaret, the badge had become his shield, and routine his only comfort. Around him, the station moved slowly. Officer Sarah Kendall was already buried in case files. Mark Hollis, the youngest officer on the team, shuffled and half awake, cracking a quiet joke no one laughed at. And behind his office door, Captain Richard Marlowe reviewed reports with the seriousness of a man used to order. The station breathed familiarity until the silence was broken by a sound no one expected. A sharp bark, followed by the rapid patter of paws echoing off the polished floor. A German Shepherd puppy, barely a few months old, came running through the front doors. Its ears weren't fully upright yet, and its dark eyes were wide with fear or urgency. It slid slightly as it entered, scrambling across the floor until it ran straight into the center of the room. The entire station froze. Tom stood up slowly and crouched down. The puppy rushed toward him without hesitation, placing its front paws on his chest and panting hard, as if it had finally found the person it was looking for. Tom scanned the entrance, expecting someone to follow after it. No one came. Then he saw it, the collar. Simple, black, but with a small pouch tucked into the side. He carefully removed it and opened the tiny bag. Inside was an old photograph, yellowed and dirt-stained. A woman, a man, and a baby. On the back, scrawled in shaky handwriting, were just 6 words. He needs to know the truth. Now. Tom's heart skipped. His hands stiffened as he stared at the picture. The room felt colder. There was something about the woman's face, something faintly familiar, like a dream that used to mean something. The puppy sat beside him now, calm and steady, watching him. Everyone else in the room stayed silent, watching Tom instead. He said nothing, just walked slowly to his desk, sat down, and looked again at the photo, then down at the puppy. His voice was low, barely above a whisper. "What did you come to show me? And why now?" Tom stared at the photograph long after the others had gone back to work. His desk phone rang once, then twice, but he didn't move to answer. His mind was somewhere else. 30 years in the past, in a room with peeling wallpaper and the scent of dust and baby powder. He hadn't thought of that day in decades, but the face in the photo pulled him right back. He wasn't sure yet, but it looked almost exactly like a woman he had known when he was just 12. A woman named Helen, who had vanished from town without a word. The puppy, now resting by Tom's feet, didn't take its eyes off him. There was something unnerving in how still the dog was, like it knew more than it should. Tom reached down and gently stroked its back. It leaned into his touch. The contact felt strange at first. He hadn't touched anything this small or this warm since the last time he held his wife's hand in the hospital bed. The puppy was quiet, loyal, and waiting. "Looks like he picked you," said Officer Sarah Kendall, breaking the silence as she walked by with a cup of coffee. "Strays don't usually come in here unless they're running from something." Tom didn't look up. "He wasn't running," he said quietly. "He came here on purpose." Sarah paused, sensing the weight in his voice. She looked down at the puppy, then at the photo still in Tom's hand. "You recognize them?" she asked. Tom hesitated. His throat tightened. "Maybe. I think the woman might be someone from a long time ago. Someone I never expected to see again." He didn't say her name. Not yet. It felt dangerous, like saying it out loud might make the past crawl out from wherever he'd buried it. He folded the photo carefully and slipped it into his drawer, locking it. Officer Mark Hollis appeared, holding a half-eaten donut. "So, are we keeping him? Or is this dog under arrest?" His grin faded when Tom looked up at him, eyes cold but focused. "He's staying with me," Tom said, "just until we find out who sent him." Hollis nodded, sensing this wasn't a joke anymore. "You gonna give him a name?" Sarah asked more gently. Tom looked down at the pup again. Its ears perked up slightly at the sound of his voice. After a few moments, he said softly, "Shadow, that's his name." Felt right. It felt like the past had a shadow, and now it was following him, paws and all. Shadow wagged his tail once, and then sat perfectly still, as if he understood every word. That evening, Tom drove home with Shadow in the passenger seat of his old Ford pickup. The truck rattled over the cracked asphalt roads leading to the edge of town. The sky was painted in soft orange and pink, but Tom barely noticed. His mind was racing, not just with the photo, but with memories he had spent years trying to forget. Pinebrook was small, but it held more secrets than most cities 10 times its size. And Tom was beginning to suspect that one of those secrets was his. Shadow sat quietly, occasionally glancing up at Tom like he was studying him. At one point, the pup rested his head gently on Tom's thigh, letting out a slow, steady sigh. Tom exhaled too. "Yeah, me too," he muttered. It had been years since anyone or anything had made him feel less alone. He didn't understand it yet, but this dog had brought something with him. Not just a photo, not just a mystery, but something personal. And Tom could feel it settling over him like a heavy coat. Back at the house, Shadow explored cautiously, sniffing the worn rug by the door, the corners of furniture untouched for months, the old leather chair where Margaret used to sit. Tom watched him in silence, surprised by how natural it felt to have someone else in the house again, even if it was just a dog. When Shadow curled up on the floor by the fireplace, Tom opened the bottom drawer of the hallway cabinet and pulled out a small, dusty photo album, one he hadn't touched since the funeral. He flipped through the pages slowly, pausing at an old picture from 1991. It showed Tom as a boy, standing beside his mother at a town fair. Behind them, almost blurred by the camera's focus, was a woman, young, blonde, smiling, holding a baby. Tom leaned in closer. His pulse quickened. It was her, Helen, and the baby in her arms. Could that have been Emily? Was that who the note was talking about? The next morning, Tom made a decision. He couldn't ignore this. Not anymore. He dropped Shadow off with Mark at the station, then drove across town to a quiet, faded house with ivy growing up its porch railings. He hadn't been there in decades. It belonged to Rachel Thatcher, a retired social worker who used to handle child placements back in the 90s. She had known Helen, and maybe, just maybe, she knew what had happened to the baby. Tom hesitated at the door. His hand hovered above the rusted doorbell. Inside, he could hear faint movement, the creak of floorboards, the clink of dishes. Then, finally, footsteps approaching. The door opened slowly, and Rachel appeared. Older, frielier than he remembered, but her sharp eyes hadn't changed. She looked at Tom for a long second. Then, without him saying a word, she whispered, "You saw the photo, didn't you?" Tom froze in place. Rachel's voice cut through the silence like a blade, gentle, but sharp with meaning. "You saw the photo, didn't you?" she repeated. He nodded slowly. Rachel stepped aside without another word and let him in. Her home smelled of old books, chamomile tea, and something bittersweet, like forgotten memories sealed in wallpaper and time. Tom sat down on the worn couch, while Rachel poured tea into two mismatched mugs. The quiet between them wasn't awkward. It was full of the weight of what hadn't been said in years. "I always wondered if this day would come," Rachel said, her hands trembling slightly as she set the mug in front of him. Helen never stopped looking over her shoulder, even after she left Pinebrook. Tom's jaw clenched. Where did she go? Rachel sat down across from him, her eyes softening. To Michigan for a while, then Ohio. She changed her name, said she had to protect the baby, said there were people who wouldn't understand. Tom's voice cracked. And the baby? Emily? Rachel looked away for a moment, then back at him. She was adopted, legally, quietly. Helen arranged everything through a private agency. She said the father wouldn't have accepted her. that the child would be better off far from here. Tom leaned forward, gripping his knees. Was I the father? The words felt foreign coming out of his mouth. Heavy, unbelievable, but deep down, something inside him had already started to accept it. Rachel sighed. Helen never said it outright, but I saw the way she looked at you when you weren't paying attention. And that photo, she must have held onto it all these years. I think she wanted you to know. Someday. Tom sat back, stunned. A daughter, a life he never knew existed, a past rewritten in a matter of minutes. Shadow hadn't just brought a message. He'd brought a missing piece of Tom's life, and now that piece was demanding to be found. He stood up slowly, as if the room had tilted beneath him. Do you know where Emily is now? He asked. Rachel shook her head. Helen passed away last year. I only found out through an old contact, but she left a file behind. One I wasn't supposed to open unless you came asking. She got up and walked to a locked cabinet near the stairs. The key shook in her hands as she turned it. She pulled out a slim manila folder, worn at the edges, and handed it to Tom with a quiet breath. This is everything Helen left behind. It's not much, but it's a start. Tom took the file, heart pounding. His fingers touched the flap, hesitating. Inside might be the last connection to the daughter he never knew he had. Tom sat alone in his truck outside Rachel's house, the manila folder resting on the passenger seat like a live wire. He hadn't opened it yet. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as if bracing for an impact that hadn't happened, at least not yet. The weight of what he might find inside was almost unbearable. A daughter, past erased, a future uncertain. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dashboard, and Tom suddenly realized how much his world had shifted in just 24 hours. Finally, he opened the file. Inside were scattered documents, old letters, a faded birth certificate, and a hospital bracelet with the name Emily Rose Granger, printed in smudged ink. Tom's breath caught. Granger. The name hit him like a wave. It wasn't just familiar. It was the last name of Captain Richard Marlowe's wife, Carolyn, his superior, his friend. His past and present were colliding in a way he couldn't explain. He flipped through the rest of the file and then he saw it. A photo of Emily at around 5 years old, standing in front of a brick house. And beside her, Carolyn Marlowe holding her hand. The pieces clicked into place hard and fast. Carolyn hadn't just known Helen. She had adopted her daughter, without telling him, without telling anyone. And now, all these years later, his captain's family was at the center of the storm. Tom felt anger rise in his chest, but underneath it was something more painful. Betrayal. Not just by Carolyn, but by fate, by time, by everyone who had decided he didn't deserve to know. He drove back to the station in silence. Shadow sat upright in the passenger seat, watching him closely, ears twitching with each shift in tone. When they arrived, Tom didn't go to his desk. He walked straight to Captain Marlowe's office and stood at the closed door, folder in hand. His knuckles hovered over the wood. Just one knock and everything would come undone. His voice, his position, his friendships. But the truth demanded light, and it had waited long enough. Before he could raise his hand, the door opened. Captain Marlowe stood there mid-sentence, but froze when he saw Tom's face. Then he noticed the folder. There was a pause. Then Marlowe said, quietly, "You found her, didn't you?" Tom stepped into the office without being invited. He closed the door behind him with a slow, steady hand, then placed the manila folder on Captain Marlowe's desk. The air in the room shifted immediately. Marlowe stood in silence, his expression unreadable, the kind of silence that only comes when the truth has finally caught up. Tom's voice, when it came, was low and sharp. "You knew," he said. "All this time, you knew who she was." Marlowe let out a long breath and sank into his chair, eyes fixed on the folder. "I didn't know at first," he said, barely above a whisper. "Carolyn didn't tell me everything, just that Emily had been born under complicated circumstances. We adopted her when she was 3. Helen gave her up and disappeared. Carolyn handled most of the paperwork. I didn't ask too many questions. I didn't want to know. Tom stared at him, jaw clenched. You didn't want to know? Or you were afraid to find out? There was a beat of silence before Marlowe spoke again. When Helen sent that Christmas card 2 years ago, with a photo of Emily as a teenager, I saw your face in her eyes. I started putting things together. But by then, what was I supposed to do? Tell her she belonged to someone else? That her life, her family, her name weren't real? His voice cracked. She's my daughter, Tom, in every way that matters. Tom turned away, trying to steady his breathing. A storm was building in his chest. Regret, resentment, grief. You had no right, he said. None of you did. I should have known. I could have been there. He swallowed hard. Helen kept her from me. But you buried the rest. Marlowe looked up, and for the first time there was no badge between them. Just two men, two fathers, both broken in different ways. She doesn't know, Marlowe said quietly. She has no idea about you. Carolyn made sure of it. That hit Tom like a punch to the ribs. He imagined Emily, his daughter, living just across town all these years, laughing, growing, struggling, without even knowing he existed. Shadow's arrival wasn't just fate. It was the moment everything refused to stay buried. Tom picked up the folder and turned to leave. She deserves to know, he said. And I deserve a chance to look her in the eye. Marlowe didn't stop him. He only said one thing, almost too quiet to hear. Then you'd better be ready for what comes next. Tom sat on the edge of his bed, the folder clutched in both hands, as if letting it go would erase everything he had just learned. The house was quiet, too quiet. Shadow lay curled at his feet, eyes half closed, ears twitching a little with every creak of the old floorboards. Tom hadn't spoken a word since he got home. His mind raced through questions that had no easy answers. How do you tell someone they've lived their entire life not knowing who they really are? And more importantly, how do you tell them you're the reason why? That night, Tom barely slept. He sat by the window with Shadow beside him, watching the moonlight slide across the front yard. At one point, he opened the folder again and stared at Emily's photo. A school portrait from a few years ago. She had her mother's eyes, but the shape of her jaw, the curve of her mouth. It was him, no doubt. That was his daughter, and she was just a few miles away, living in a house with a last name that never belonged to her. By morning, Tom had made up his mind. He needed to see her, not as a police officer, not as a stranger, but as the man who should have been there all along. He drove slowly through Pinebrook's east side, a part of town he rarely visited. It was quieter here, neat lawns, faded American flags, front porches where old folks sat with coffee and worn-out dogs. He found the house from the photo and parked across the street, heart pounding like a war drum. Shadow shifted in the passenger seat, sensing the change in his energy. The front door opened. A girl stepped out, long dark hair, jeans, backpack slung over one shoulder. She looked both confident and distracted, the way teenagers do when they think no one's watching. Tom's chest tightened. It was her, Emily, the daughter he'd never held, never read bedtime stories to, never walked into a school dance. And now, here she was, a young woman with her whole life ahead of her, unaware that the man watching her from across the street had her eyes. He wanted to get out of the truck, wanted to call her name, but instead, he stayed frozen, fingers tightening on the steering wheel. What could he say that wouldn't destroy the life she knew? The moment felt too big, too fragile. So he watched her walk down the driveway, earbuds in, unaware of the storm just beyond the curb. And as she disappeared around the corner, Tom whispered the truth to himself. Just once. That's my daughter. Tom didn't go to work that day. He couldn't. His badge, his uniform, they all felt like costumes now. For years, he had built a life on control and order, following the rules, staying in his lane. But now, the past was rewriting the script, and he wasn't sure who he was supposed to be anymore. Shadow followed him through the house, quiet and alert, sensing the shift. Tom didn't say much. He couldn't find the words. Everything in him was tied up in knots: guilt, anger, longing, and beneath it all, something new: fear. He thought about going back to the house, knocking on the door, telling her everything, no matter the cost. But the truth wasn't simple. Not anymore. Carolyn Marlowe had raised Emily. She had loved her, protected her, been there for every moment he had missed. Tearing that apart in one conversation felt cruel, even if it was honest. He didn't want to hurt Emily. He just wanted to know her, be near her, understand the woman she had become. Later that afternoon, Tom drove to the high school parking lot and waited. The final bell rang, and students began to pour out of the building, laughing, shoving each other, talking about nothing and everything. Then he saw her, Emily. She walked with two other girls, smiling, tossing her hair over one shoulder as she texted on her phone. She looked so alive, so young. Tom felt a sharp ache in his chest. Not just for the years he'd missed, but for how little she needed him now. As she crossed the lot toward her mother's car, Tom got out of the truck. His feet felt heavy, his breath shallow. Shadow remained inside, watching through the window. Tom started walking, one slow step at a time, unsure of what he would say when he reached her. But halfway there, Carolyn Marlowe stepped out of the car. She saw him instantly. Her face changed. Not fear, something colder, protective. She stepped in front of Emily like a shield. Emily didn't notice. She climbed into the passenger seat, still laughing with her friends. Carolyn never took her eyes off Tom. There was no greeting, no hesitation, just a quiet warning written all over her face. Don't. Tom stopped. Everything in him said to keep walking, to push through, to demand what had been stolen from him. But he didn't. He stood there, silent, watching the woman who had raised his child drive her away again. And for the second time in his life, Tom Davenport let his daughter go. Tom didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dark living room, staring at the photo of Emily when she was a little girl, the same photo from the file Rachel had given him. Shadow lay curled by the front door, as if keeping watch. Every hour that passed felt heavier, like time itself was demanding he act, or live with the silence forever. Tom wasn't just haunted by what he hadn't said. He was haunted by the idea that, if he stayed quiet, he would lose her a second time, this time by choice. The next morning, he drove out to the lake, the same lake where he used to fish with his father when he was a boy. It was calm, still, but the memories were not. He pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook from his glove box. Margaret's, her old journal. He hadn't opened it in years. Flipping through the worn pages, he landed on an entry dated October 1994, the year Emily was born. It wasn't long, but the last line stopped him cold. If Tom ever finds out, I hope he forgives me. His hands trembled. Margaret had known. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to keep it from him. Enough to carry that secret into her grave. Tom looked out over the lake, trying to breathe through the storm inside his chest. He realized, then, that silence had shaped his entire life. His father's silence, Margaret's, Helen's, and now his own. Maybe the only way to finally be free of it was to break it, once and for all. Later that day, Tom returned to the station. He asked Sarah Kendall to take over his shifts for the next few days. No explanation. She nodded, concern in her eyes, but didn't press. Mark Hollis offered to walk Shadow, but Tom refused. He stays with me, he said. Shadow had become more than just a dog. He was a witness, a thread woven through the unraveling truth. That evening, Tom wrote a letter. He poured everything into it. The past, the regret, the truth Helen never told, and the hope he didn't dare speak out loud. He sealed it in an envelope, wrote one word on the front, Emily, and drove to the Marlowe house under the cover of night. No confrontation this time, just a choice. He walked quietly up the porch steps, placed the envelope under the doormat, and stood there for a moment. Then he whispered into the stillness, "Please, give her a reason to read it." And with Shadow at his side, he turned and walked away, not knowing if she ever would. 3 days passed. Tom tried not to watch the clock, but he always knew the time. He walked Shadow through the quiet streets each morning, the leash loose in his hand, his thoughts even looser. The envelope had been left at her door. It was out of his hands now. Still, every time his phone buzzed, every time someone knocked at the station, his heart jumped. But nothing came. No calls. No letters. No Emily. He told himself he'd done what he could. But deep down, he couldn't stop asking himself if it had been enough. Then, on the fourth day, just before sunset, there was a knock at his front door. Tom opened it slowly, unsure of who he was expecting. But when he saw her standing there, jeans, hoodie, backpack slung over one shoulder, he forgot how to breathe. Emily. Her eyes were red, not from crying, but from thinking. Heavy thoughts, adult thoughts, the kind no teenager should have to carry. And for a long second, neither of them said a word. "I read it," she said finally. Her voice was steady. "All of it." Tom nodded. He didn't try to speak. Shadow stood by his leg, tail swaying gently, watching her the way he had watched Tom on that first day. Emily looked down at the dog, then back up. "Is this him? The one who brought the picture?" Tom let out a quiet breath. "Yeah, that's Shadow. He found his way to me. Same way I hope you will." They sat on the porch steps side by side, like two people still learning how to share the same air. She had questions. He had fewer answers than she probably hoped. But for the first time in his life, Tom spoke openly. About Helen, about Margaret, about the silence that shaped him, and the truth that nearly slipped through his fingers. Emily listened, not as a child, not as a stranger, but as someone who deserved to know where she came from, and who had walked a long road just to sit there with him. The sun dipped low behind the trees. The cicadas began their chorus. Shadow rested his head between them, eyes half closed. And in that quiet, Emily reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to him. "I wrote something too," she said. "You can read it later." Tom held the paper like it was glass, fragile but full of meaning. And for the first time in decades, he didn't feel like something was missing.